23andMe, which is a DNA repo website, they also got hacked, and it was because of weak user passwords. And their response was, well, it's not our fault our users have bad passwords. They should be using good passwords. And so again, it's just kind of like this pushback. Hey, user, don't be so dumb.
Welcome everyone to Return of the Mac, episode 6, getting better with my counting skills here. And I'm really excited for the guest that we have today and the topic that we have today, because I wanted to start off 2024 in a way that really sets the standard. On my last episode with Jason, we talked about the less noisy, less sophisticated landscape that 2023 kind of felt like, while dramatic in and of itself in the cyber world. It was less dramatic on some of the techniques and tactics that we were reviewing, more so dramatic on the cyber breach side. So if you've been in the cybersecurity industry for any set period of time, you've probably heard of the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, as we've referred to them as. So you've also probably heard of the CIS Critical Security Controls Framework, which is a set of best practices standard designed within this framework to help organizations improve their overall security posture. It also happens to be one of the most world-renowned and respected security frameworks out there, as well as CIS and all the contributions that they put into our industry. So this is the episode for you. And it's not just you, whether you're a noob into cyber, you're a normie level and you're leadership or running a business, or an IT provider or an MSP partner of ours, or you are a CISO. Like, everything that we talk about today is designed to demystify CIS, start from the basics, and understand how you should be leveraging it. This is kind of like, this is our version of Cyber Dry January. So let's get into focusing on detoxifying all of our cybersecurity issues and focusing on our security maturity journey through this. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Phyllis Lee. She is the Vice President of Content Development for Center of Internet Security, the nonprofit behind CIS Controls, and outside of just being a badass leader for CIS and within the cyberspace, Phyllis is also the host of Cyber Call with Andrew Morgan, Wes Spencer, Gary Pica. And so far on the list, I have not interviewed Gary Pica on this podcast yet, but I'm sure he's gonna really make it exciting. I'll just have to think of a really good topic for Gary, or activity in that general sense. So she's also has over 25 years experience, not just in information assurance, but she's formerly from pre-CIS career, the NSA. So Phyllis, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here, friend.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you. It's a good way to kick off the new year, talking to you. I always enjoy seeing you, Mackenzie. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, and I hope your holiday was good. Are you feeling like? I know you said you mentioned earlier that you took a 2-week break, and so you're coming back into work after 2 weeks, and I know that that's sometimes a mind mess.
It was good though, because, so my son got sick, which is not good. But what that made us do, I have a son and a daughter. What that made us do is like not very many activities. And so I read books. I watched Netflix. Normally we're like,
I like that you started with books. Yeah. That's the resolution I try to say. I'm like, I'm reading this book right now, but I also binged this show.
Yeah,
so I think that's
exactly.
A good way to start.
Exactly. Well, they were good, like kind of just mindless fun books versus self-help, try to learn something new books.
Yeah. I'm a self-help type of girl. That's definitely my type of book. Netflix is not my self-help. Netflix is my escape at that point. Well, thank you for being here. We always start each episode kind of talking about hot topics of the week. And I think the theme for our hot topic is Google and all things Google. So I'm sure you've kind of heard of some of these, but let's get going. Coming in first place on the Google themed hot topic. We've got two of them today, and you'll kind of know why they're related, but not related. Google is kind of the relation there. But we're going to talk about this new info stealing malware that just hit the headlines using Google's multi-login Chrome feature, essentially, to access information or account information and essentially steal session cookies and those session tokens from users that are leveraging this Chrome feature. So this is an information stealing malware that's actively targeting multi-login, this Chrome feature. If you know anything about OAuth, you know it's an open standard. It's designed to help users access third-party websites, applications, other websites, and make it as simple as possible. And Google's one of the companies that actually leverages OAuth for its authentication for its users. So in this specific exploit, this malware is designed to hijack user sessions and allow continuous access to Google services even after the password is reset. So that's kind of the key thing here. And then we're starting to see threat actors not just enable this. Of course, this exploit is now trending in these malware families for information stealing and credential theft, but they're also expanding it a little bit further. They're taking this exploit and they're making it so that it can bypass other Google security features for token regeneration as well. So fun stuff. So essentially, you have this info stealing malware infects the user's PC. It'll scan the system for Chromium session cookies, and then it'll exfiltrate them and send them to a remote server controlled by the bad guys. Now, for multi-login, those stolen tokens can actually be used to log into any OAuth identity. And then even if the user changes their known good password, they'll still have access. And really the only way Google is telling you to counteract this is to log out of your accounts. So log out of your Google accounts when you're done using them on various websites. And it's not like any of us have a barge full of tabs open in our browser anyways. And, welcome to my new support group of I have too many browser tabs because I think that's normal. So Phyllis, your first take on this of Google's great advice of just log out.
I know. The first thing when I read this was like, oh, once again, usability versus security is always the challenge, right? And it is, and P.S., Google wanted to make everything easy for us, right?
Yeah.
Because they have all these agreements. I can log into my kid's website via my Google account. I can log into social media via my Google account.
That's
everything
what the people want. Yeah,
exactly. And then it's like, oh, darn. I mean, I don't even like to restart my browser too much because I don't like to log out of Netflix and all of that stuff. But so, it is a shame. And what I thought was interesting was when Google said, well, users are empowered to fix it on their own.
That's the
log out.
Best advice ever, because we know the end user's always been empowered to enable MFA on their own and use good password complexity standards on their own.
And, I just think that's funny because my boss had just sent me, 23andMe, which is a DNA repo website. They also got hacked, and it was because of weak user passwords. And their response was, well, it's not our fault our users have bad passwords. They should be using good passwords. And so again, it's just kind of like this pushback. Hey, user, don't be so dumb.
Welcome to Return of the Mac for all those users that don't have good passwords and don't enable MFA and certainly don't log out of their websites and browsers or Google accounts. I know.
So I just thought those things were interesting where it seems, now this is like the second or third article where it's like, oh, the onus is back on the user now.
Right.
And so
where we're at in the world, though. It's always going to be back on the user.
I know.
Unless you're the organization that gets hit and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait. And that actually brings me into my next topic. It's not quite an organization that's going to be hit, but in the theme of Google. So cyber firm and now Google Cloud subsidiary, Mandiant, praise be Kevin Mandiant. One time I met him. I kind of met him. I met him a couple of times. He won't remember me from DARP. And I was standing the next time, my friend Bella and I were standing behind him at coffee at the MWise conference. And I felt like I was behind Brad Pitt or something. And I don't know why.
So funny. Isn't that so funny? The people who we look.
I was like, please look at me. Please look at me. And then he turned around and I remember Bella and I were standing there, we're like, hi. And then he quickly walked away. So, but
I think I hear my order.
Yeah. So maybe someday I'll run into him again, but
you will, Mackenzie.
It is the thing we look forward to in our cyber industry.
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, so probably not the best hot topic, but the next hot topic is Mandiant, otherwise known as Mandiant, now owned by Google or whatever their tagline is. Their X account, or aka tweet account, was compromised for more than 6 hours by an unknown attacker. So far, still unknown, to propagate a crypto scan for crypto, or for the Phantom crypto service wallet service. So now the account's been restored, of course. So it's 6 hours. It's not too bad. It's not really clear how it was breached, or it's not public yet of how it was compromised. And it was renamed. Their account was renamed to @PhantomSolW to impersonate this crypto service. Really, the point of this story too is, one, Google, and no one is safe. But it's almost like a modern day take on the watering hole attack, where you attract users to websites that have been compromised in order to infect their systems. And it's kind of the same thing with social media now. And I'm sure this is why people need to pay attention to these cyber type of headlines, because they're not necessarily going to be on your local news. But as an organizational leader, you should read this and immediately think, I wonder who in my marketing department is running our Twitter account and the things that we post, because this is a little bit of the reputation side of things that really can impact an organization. And so bad guys are known to hijack these gold verified X accounts, but they also hijack dormant accounts in order to, input malicious domains and attract users to them, and then create or contribute to a larger bot network that we all are probably already a part of that we don't realize.
Right.
Did I mention this is kind of like a depressing show, like a very dark humor, existential show? There is no remediation. Just reset your password or log out. I guess.
Right. Log out.
To log out.
Password.
Yeah. Use a good password and log out. This is where we're at. But so thoughts on this? It's kind of Google themed, but only because they own them.
But I think it's interesting again, just like you said, that reputational risk is something that you need to look at. And there are these firms, part of their kind of overall how they monitor your security is not necessarily just for malware incidents, but also, they'll monitor your media accounts and all these things to see if anything gets hacked. So I'm curious to know, did Mandiant do that? Do they monitor their social media accounts? Who was the first person to detect it? And all of that, because like you said, media accounts are just another attack vector.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's one more thing that we need to monitor. So as we have new ways of marketing and reaching out to folks, it again is a new way for also threat actors to compromise our accounts and do damage.
Yeah. Talk about a department that you would have some interesting take on, is the marketing department, or even the public relations or communications department of, hey, I wonder what they're up to. And I wonder how to access the things that they access, and even their websites, right? Getting access to, this goes not just to social media accounts, but, your maybe WordPress hosted sites. If you're able to perform an intrusion and compromise that, this is where, again, that watering hole attacks. You can have a completely legitimate, Big O Tires or Costco of Caldwell or something. They don't do that, but you can take a legitimate website and then weaponize it essentially, which is ingenious, especially for things that are what we're seeing more on the modern malware side, like those low noise type of remote access tools or botnets that get stuck on those systems. So everyone should
I know.
keep eyes on this.
I
Log
mean,
out of your
it's so
browsers
clever.
and
It's also
and
like, you know, you
protect your
have to take
social
a step
media.
back and be like, this is so clever. This
It
so
is. It is.
I
I'm
mean,
glad that they didn't do something worse. And this was just a shameless promotion for their cryptocurrency.
right.
So it could have been worse, but
Right.
I think everyone's wondering who did that outside, obviously,
Right.
whoever runs Phantom cryptocurrency.
Right.
And then it goes deeper. We could put in our tinfoil hats and go even deeper. Did they use the Chrome extension exploit?
Right.
What's going on there? Well, perfect. So we're running out of hot topics. We are going to go straight into the questions that will demystify CIS. So I'm just going to start off like the basic girl I am without my Stanley Cup with me of whether you are a security practitioner, you're a noob, you're a normie, you're a CISO. We have all risen, many of us have risen through the CIS bootcamp and or some other framework where we don't know where to start or overwhelmed. So I want to start with the most basic of questions of, Phyllis, what is CIS or who is CIS and the purpose behind it? And what is the purpose behind the CIS critical controls framework? And why should anyone care?
Sure. So CIS, Center for Internet Security, is a small but mighty, we always say, not-for-profit. We have what I would consider two sides of the house. We have the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Underneath there is the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing Analysis Center. That is funded through a cooperative agreement with DHS, and it's managed by CISA. And so that is in some sense an extension of the federal government. They provide threat intel, incident response to SLTTs, MSISAC, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, as well as the elections infrastructure. So as we know, in 2016, there was a big brouhaha over the fidelity of election results, which turned out to be fine. But there was some issues and people were concerned, so they stood up the EIISAC underneath the MSISAC. The interesting thing I always
cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. The interesting thing that I like to point out is while elections are state run, they're run separately. So that's why you would think the MSISAC could naturally support the elections infrastructure, the states would, but they're separate. So, just another fun fact to note. And so what's nice is you get that operational threat data. And so what I always like to say is offense informs defense. So on the defensive side, we have security best practices, and that's where I sit. We have content development. So that means that the CIS critical security controls and our benchmarks fall under me. And so what we do in security best practices, of course, is we create that content, we develop it, and then we also provide the tooling around it to help you assess against our content. So I'll start off with our CIS critical security controls. It is a security framework. Why should you care? Well, we have that kind of this tagline. It's not about the list, right? So there are tons of good lists out there, dozens and dozens.
There's a lot of frameworks that sound different, but are pretty much the same too.
There's a ton of overlap. And so when you go to decide what list you pick, I think what's important is to make sure you have the ecosystem around the list to help you support implementing that list. So what does that mean? It means guidance. How is it that I'm going to implement this list? Prioritization. Not everyone can implement everything all at once. Even, a Fortune 100 billion-dollar company cannot, because they're just not resourced that way, right? And you can't just have this whole huge team go out and implement a framework all at once. So you need that prioritization. You need some tools to help implement as well as to help evaluate or assess against that framework. And that's what we provide here at CIS. And it's really all for free, which is nice. And I do believe we're still the only framework for our prioritization. It's backed by data. So our prioritization scheme is called implementation groups. We have 3, implementation group 1, 2, and 3. We believe IG1 is implementable by all enterprises, regardless of size. And so we wanted to make sure that if you are a small, medium enterprise with little to no cybersecurity expertise or even IT expertise, that you could implement IG1. We also wanted to make sure that if we told you only had to implement IG1, you could actually defend against top threats, right? And so we have something called the community defense model, in which we showed that if you implement these 56 safeguards, which comprise implementation group 1, that you could defend against the top threats, which were ransomware, malware, application hacking, insider threat, and web application. What did I say? I'm sorry. I think I messed up those 5 attacks.
Let me look at my poster.
Web application hacking. Web application hacking.
When I was in the SLTT space when, I'd first was phone book slapped with CIS and looking at the 20 critical controls. And isn't it, I feel like back then, and I could be wrong, we were told kind of, we do these 20 security critical controls, because we were focusing so much on NIST for our IRS audits that we're like, if you do all these controls, you can accomplish like 80% of the NIST requirements and controls that are in place, or 80 to 90. So it would make, actually, when you jump on other frameworks that you have to abide by for regulatory purposes, by doing the critical controls framework, you can appease pretty much everything. But it's almost an easy button or an easier way to do it than just going through 853 or something and doing every single control.
I agree. And that's the feedback that we've gotten. We've always say start with controls. And that's why one of the services that we provide, again, for free, is we map to over 30 other regulatory frameworks. Like you said, NIST CSF, ISO, name whatever, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, PCI, a lot of financial ones as well, because a lot of even, big banks will start with controls.
Right.
Because it's nice that it prioritizes what you're going to implement. And then we do provide that mapping so you can show compliance to those regulatory frameworks when that auditor comes around.
So outside of why should people care? Because cybersecurity is a thing. We need everyone to have some universal knowledge around this, but why should they care about this type of framework in general and what as a tool, what it can provide?
I think it's because what you really need to understand is why, how to get started. And I think, why you should care is because, number one, you really do need to show compliance to other regulatory frameworks. And this is easy to read. It's easier. I won't say it's easier to implement, because we do ask for one activity or one thing to accomplish per safeguard. If you ever read another framework, one control really asks for 10 things. And so what we really try to do is break that down for you to make it easy. And, many organizations can't do that risk assessment on their own. And so we've kind of done that for you, which is how we came up with our prioritization. And so I think at this point in everyone's kind of, cybersecurity life, you do have to care about how well you're defending your networks. You have to care about state privacy law. You have to care about all these things in which you may be liable for. And so how is it that you come into compliance with those? And what we're seeing really in state legislation is CIS critical security controls is a way. And so we're seeing that across at least 5 states at this point, and legislation pending in multiple states.
Very nice.
Pointing to the CIS controls, as well as NIST CSF or the 800-53.
Right.
But again,
you guys have companion guides too for cloud security and mappings to all of the frameworks you've suggested too. So it's almost like this is the, Ryobi tool set people want to use when they have to tackle other frameworks. Start here maybe. Right. And it is easy to digest comparatively.
Yeah. And I think, we try to answer those questions. So one of the questions, like you just said, was how do I get started? right? And so we really get to listen to that feedback versus some of these other organizations that maintain frameworks. They're just maintaining their framework from year to year. So we get to hear that feedback, and people do say, how do I get started? So we say, okay, start off with our control self-assessment tool, the free one. Just assess against implementation group 1 and see where you're at. Okay. See how well you fare and see where your deficits are, right? And that's how we came up with our policy templates, because we got feedback from a K-12 that said, we've never had to write these policies before, like asset management policy, software asset management policy, data management policy.
I mean, a side question, why do policies matter? Me asking that. Why do non-technical policies matter outside of a compliance check mark?
Right. I mean, you need to understand what you actually want to implement. You need to understand what you actually care about, right? So, what is your critical data? What do you consider data that you need to protect? And how well do you need to protect it, whether mandated by a regulatory framework or just in general, what's your obligation? So for a K-12, now that everyone's online, there's a lot more data that those organizations need to protect. And so they need to identify it. Where is it? Is it in a teacher's email? Is it back on your server? Is it in the cloud? I had to put all my children's health data and forms and load it up to the, a website or whatever now.
Oh, so, that's actually terrifying.
Yeah. Everything. And so, they better understand.
Ease of operability and life itself mees we're all online and in the cloud, which also means we should care whether organizations are doing this.
So does my kid's school care about HIPAA? Not necessarily, but do they have a lot of my children's data? Yeah. And so should they be protecting it? Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And so you need those policies in place to understand, what data do I have now? How well, for example, data management policy. Same thing with like the software asset management policy. Like, why do I care? It's more than just licensing.
Right.
Is it up to date? Why? Because I care about vulnerabilities, all these things. Also, is that software internet facing? Is it not internet facing? Should I have MFA? Should I not have, MFA? And all these things that organizations need to understand come to light when you actually have to stop and think about, what are your priorities? What do you care about?
Well, I think the hardest thing about these types of baseline assessments, like that, right? First step is admitting you have a problem.
Right.
So going through and doing the baseline assessment and figuring it out, and you guys have a tool built in to do that and make it really easy. And I think it sheds light on the fact that the hardest part, I think, about that baseline assessment portion or stage is finding out, okay, I need to answer this question. Who knows the answer within my organization? Because you're likely going to have some sort of GRC level analyst or a new security practitioner, or the only security person you have, or the IT director. And they're going to be now going through this assessment being like, wait, I don't know the answer. Now I need to go to all these different departments, even just looking at software inventory and which pieces of software applications are owned and approved, hopefully, and owned by different components of the business, and then asking them, how is this integrated? What type of data does this take? It really, I think, I like the advice, start with the baseline assessment, and just, I think, prepare for the fact that the hardest part is going to be finding the person that has the answer to the questions that you need to answer in the first place.
Right. And I will tell you, governance is always like the hardest part, right? Also, like, who's in charge? Who gets to say? Is it the IT person that gets to tell HR?
I was going to say, who's the approver? Who's the scapegoat for the company?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So why should you care? Well, one, you should care because you care when other businesses are messing with your data. So you should take the next step forward, and you should care, I guess, at the minimum of reputational basis here of making sure, like, what does it look like? And did we even go to a good starting point for taking security seriously?
Yeah. And I will say almost every state is going to enact privacy law. Almost every state. And they're all in the process. I say every state will be.
And that'll affect small and medium business too.
It will affect everybody. And you need to understand what it means to protect data. Everyone has PII to some level if you have a business.
Mm-hmm.
Period. If you're accepting credit card data, if you're writing down someone's name and phone number so you can contact
What if you're
them.
like an independent contractor too? Just
Oh, yeah.
going down like half my friends that are cool
Yeah.
independent contractors
Yeah.
doing weird things.
What equipment do you have? Are you allowed to print data off on your own personal printer? Are you, what data is, my husband works for a big company, and I was like, oh, are they issuing you a laptop? He's like, no, I'm going to use my own, they gave you money to buy your own laptop. I'm like, well, are we downloading photos to that laptop? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, wait. What are we doing with that laptop?
We're going to need to air gap that laptop. You're going to need to plug it in over here. It's going to have its own private firewall.
I mean, what are we, and it's like,
Good
what's
thing
the
he has you around.
policy? Is the company, you know what I mean? Like,
what's the corporate policy?
I'm asking him all these questions.
I love that though. That's good. Okay. So looking back at 2023 and looking forward at 2024, because you're going to be the talking head for CIS right now, what has CIS noted in this past year, and what are kind of the predictions for 2024, this upcoming year? Are they saying?
Yeah, sure. So my perspective is always skewed towards defense, right? So I don't necessarily look at attacks to bin them per se. I look at attacks to say, do we have the appropriate defenses in place? Are the CIS critical security controls still relevant? Do we need to add a control, take away a control, add a safeguard, so on and so forth? And so what I noted in 2023, while there were new attack vectors, for example, to get ransomware on a machine, so on and so forth, and while, AI, of course, was a big buzzword, and so maybe those phishing attacks didn't have very many spelling errors and, provided better context, et cetera, and so on and so forth. The defenses remain the same, right? You still have to know your environment. You still should have MFA. You still need to have account management, and all these things still need to be in place. So that's what I would note about 2023. For as much as we always talk about evolving threat landscape, and certainly I've used that phrase plenty of times myself.
Worst drinking game ever is how many times you go to a security conference and they use the term threat landscape. I mean, I just did it a few times, but I mean, it's, and I didn't feel like it was very evolved this past year. I feel like it just hyper focused on the fact that we're in the definition of insanity, that we're still not doing the same thing over and over again and experiencing it.
Exactly. So implementation group 1, which we call essential cyber hygiene.
Okay, IG1.
IG1. We always say, whenever I see a new attack, I'm like, well, if they implemented IG1, could they have defended against it? And it's always like, oh yes. Thank
gosh, you guys are a not-for-profit, because there's your marketing right there. Did you use IG1? I don't know. Probably could have saved the day, but you didn't do IG1.
Right. And for 2024, I would say more of the same. We're still need essential cyber hygiene. And so it's not some new fancy attack. It's maybe more clever, like the, X or Twitter attack that you just discussed. But because we aren't raising the bar that high, we don't really, we're not forcing their hand. We're
going to be saying the same things, but I think at more of a hyper scale. I mean, we could have some impending. Everyone watched Leave the World Behind on Netflix. So I think we're all worried about boats coming up on shore and losing access to our ring camera. But I do think that we're going to hyper focus on the extent of these attacks while we've seen them before happening. And especially, you mentioned a little earlier, but the misinformation campaigns,
right?
And the things from, global cyber warfare of what we're seeing in Ukraine and the presidential election coming up and all of these things. We're going to hyper focus on, well, why should I care about a remote access Trojan that's getting some sort of rat that's getting dumped on my device because I clicked on the wrong thing? And phishing 101, we're going to keep talking about that, but you should care because it contributes to a larger problem where we're going to see more of these types of tactics hitting a larger scope of people and devices.
I'm glad you mentioned that reputational risk, because that is something that should be a focus for organizations. We often talk about how do you express cyber risk to the business, and reputational risk is one of those ways. Of course, the impact to the business, the bottom line profit is always the number one way, but reputational risk is also another way in which that can affect your bottom line. And I also think it's important to talk about, I would say, liability of not putting in defenses. Like I said, we see a very strong uptick in privacy law. And one of the things that we are doing at CIS is creating the argument and writing a paper on what does it mean to implement reasonable security. So why do organizations care? Because they're going to be liable because of state law. And then once every state puts in this privacy law, maybe the federal government will come in and they'll do a blanket thing. But right now it's state. And so if you're a company that is doing business in multiple states, you really have to monitor that, right? And so what does it mean to implement a reasonable cybersecurity program so that you can't get sued? So there are some states where there is, like in Nevada, where they actually point to CIS Critical Security Controls, in Ohio and Connecticut and a few others that may have like a safe harbor law. So for example, if you implement critical security controls, you can only be sued up to a certain amount. Or you can show that you were reasonable and then maybe you can't get sued. Right. And so that is what's I see also in 2024, more of these state laws. And so we are putting that paper together, of course, pointing to CIS critical security controls because they are in a lot of the legislation. And what does it mean to implement CIS critical security controls reasonably? Right. And so we've written that down. The paper will be coming out hopefully at the end of this month or the beginning of February.
That's fantastic.
And I think another thing that which is always on people's radar is cybersecurity insurance. How is it that I can get insurance and not have my rates?
I feel like we look at these competing industries, not industries, where we see like SLTT space and feds picking up on regulations, SCEC coming in with their, Black Hawk Helic coming in to bomb you with fines or scare CISOs from becoming CISOs. And then you have, like coming in from the cyber insurance side. We're like, hey guys, we want to play too.
Right. Yeah.
And yet they don't communicate. They're not going to have the same standards. But I think that just what you said, like the liability conversation is coming up. It's becoming more prevalent. And so look out for that blog, people, because that what is considered reasonable cybersecurity, you're right. It's going to impact everything from not just cyber. I imagine cyber insurance is going to tack on.
Yeah. We're actively reaching out to cybersecurity insurers to say, can we just have a standard, right?
Yeah.
So that organizations understand. And granted, they don't have all that data yet, but it can only help everyone out if they understand upfront, what is it that I need?
Yeah, I think it'll help out the cyber insurance field too, because right now it's been so loosey-goosey where everyone gets cyber insurance, but yet everyone is still experiencing breaches. So they're getting dropped from their policies. Right. And now they're like, wait, what do we have to do? But if we just kind of educate and uplift the cyber insurance field to say, hey, focus less on the bottom line and focus more so on the requirements of, you don't just drop them, like let's push them through a partnership here.
What if you had a flood and then your homeowner's insurance refused to pay? You're like, well,
now what? You go out of business. Yeah. We saw this with like the Colonial Pipeline. They're like, okay, what's the liability fine? Pay the ransom. Ooh, let's pay the ransom.
Exactly.
A lot cheaper.
Exactly.
Okay, well, so I have 2 questions left and we don't have a ton of time, but next question is, if you were an expert, where would you point an expert CIS person? We talked about where people can start, kind of the baseline, understanding it and the purpose and why they should really give a Don't worry, Patrick blurts that out. But the next thing is like, where do the experts go? What are the tools you can recommend to them to go forth with?
Yeah, sure. So an expert number one, I would say, read the community defense model. You will certainly understand it and know, hey, here are the top 5 attacks that everyone is seeing. However, if you're in a particular sector, for example, financial or I don't know, tech or whatever, and you have data that shows differently, that's great, because what we've done is we've mapped to MITRE attack techniques and sub-techniques. So you can still use what we've done to help ensure that your prioritization is met using CIS critical security controls. And so I would say, number one, start with CDM, and also look at our CIS risk assessment methodology. And so those more sophisticated organizations should be able to look at something like a CIS RAM, which has been shown to in court as well, that methodology to help you to show duty of care, kind of that reasonableness that I have put the defenses in place that I need. So you can say, so the nice thing about CIS RAM, it says, what's the harm to my business? What's the harm to others? Right? Okay. You have to keep that in mind when you're implementing your cybersecurity framework. It's not just what am I going to lose? What am I going to cause someone else to lose? Right? Because the courts will look at that. And they'll say, oh, you did that, but
you just had to add in that line. Yeah. Why? Because your lawyers will care.
Yes, exactly. Someone's lawyer is going to care.
They're going to find it.
Yeah. And so I would say, if you're an expert and already know that, look at that to say, okay, do I need to implement this control? Yes or no? Is that past that threshold will harm me and harm others, as well as, or do I have a compensating control that I don't have to implement this control, but then you document it. And that's your best defense, right? You document it. Or you can say, oh, this safeguard doesn't apply to me because I have a compensating control, or no, I just don't even have this technology or whatever. So I would say, if you're advanced, go to CDM, make sure the prioritization is the same prioritization for you. Go to CIS RAM, prioritize how you're going to implement the controls based on your threat level, based on your business risk that you're willing to assume, as well as how your business can affect others.
Perfect. I love that. For the experts out there who've already messed with this is the direction to go now. My last thing that I have to ask, that I asked Jason on the last episode, and I just love it. If you could kiss, marry, or kill, well, we should all marry all the controls. If you could kiss, marry, and kill specific controls based on difficulty of implementation to most important, someone you should probably marry, and, swipe left or swipe right, which controls would those be?
So I would marry asset management.
We all knew that was going to be the thing.
Yeah, you need that good foundation. I mean, you have to know what you have in order to defend. And if you don't know what you have, then you're hosed. Like, every house needs a good foundation. If there's a crack in your foundation, forget about it. You're sinking. Your house is sinking.
Asset management. That's perfect. Okay.
Come on, people.
Mary's always the easiest.
Yes.
Who would you kill?
I would kill application whitelisting.
Ooh, fancy.
And that's because while application whitelisting is probably the number one thing you can do to defend against pretty much every attack, it's always like, oh, application whitelisting. Oh, application whitelisting. I would say that it's the hardest one to implement effectively. And in order to actually implement effective application whitelisting, you have to have good hardware asset management, software asset management. You need to know where your high priority data is. You need to know what accounts are active. You need,
continuously.
Yeah, you need to know so many things across all the critical security controls before you can actually implement effective application whitelisting. There's so many dependencies. I get so often asked, but what are the top 5 things, Phyllis? What are the top 5 things? And it's easy to put that at the top of the list.
Right? Because it would mean you accomplish the other 20 or 19 things. If you make that number one, then it's like, oh, well, you have to do all these first. So
that's why I would kill it, because it's do the other things first, please. Everyone wants the easy button.
It's a distraction. Yeah.
It really is. And people say it, and they say it glibly. Oh, my top 10 application whitelisting, not knowing.
That you don't just purchase a product and press go. It takes a bit of reconnaissance internally and awareness to do it.
You're going to have probably multiple application whitelists across your enterprise, right? It's not going to be one big list in the front. of your
We
cloud.
wish.
There's like you in this cloud, and then there's your application whitelisting right in front of the cloud.
Okay, so who would you swipe right on out of the controls?
Secure configuration.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Because everyone needs to experience it once in their life.
At least.
Before you marry asset management.
Before you marry asset
know what a secure configuration feels like. Yep.
You should always have, at least try secure configuration. You can get a lot out of that thing.
You can get a lot out of it. You might have to revisit it at some point, but
exactly.
Absolutely.
You'll feel good afterwards for the most part. There'll be some.
Swipe right on secure configuration, marry asset management, yes. And let's just kill app whitelisting. But by kill, we mean you got to do everything else before you actually focus on the difficult. It's not an easy button for app whitelisting. I love that. Exactly. Well, Phyllis, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great way to kick off the new year and get things going. And yeah, thanks so much. So we'll be looking forward to that. What was the blog again that they need to know?
Oh, right.
All businesses.
Reasonable security. It's a paper, but we'll have a blog post out on it, hopefully by the beginning of February.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so thank you so much, Mackenzie, for inviting me. And I will see you hopefully in person in March, right?
You will. Right a boom. Shameless promotion. We are pairing up with CIS for our CTF challenge, our pre-day workshop. So come hang out with Phyllis and I. There will be a bar and music and everything if you're going to Ride of Boom. Otherwise, you can always shameless promotion. Again, Ride of Boom.
I'm excited for it.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be
Vegas,
super fun.
Full of memories. So many memories. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you on the next Return of the Mac.